Don't question it. Just don't question it. Hey all, it's Starzy, and today I am going to be talking about my top 20 books of 2020. Now it's actually really hard narrowing this down because I read, I think, 94 books in 2020, and majority of those I gave 4 stars, which means majority of the books I read I really enjoy. And as some of you may or may not know, I don't give 5 stars out very often. So yeah, it means I really enjoyed majority of the things I read. So basically then the way that I have narrowed it down to 20, because that's a nice number for 2020, is I've only included books that have particularly stayed in my head and that I've particularly thought about since reading them. Because a lot of books that I read, even if I really enjoy them at the time, I don't necessarily think about them again, or not very often, all that kind of stuff. So that's basically what the criteria was to make this list. They had to be books that I really enjoyed while I was reading them and that I've also thought about since. In saying that though, like, just go to my Goodreads and look at everything I rated 4 stars in 2020, and there's lots of things in there that I really enjoyed that I would also recommend. But I did forget to mention that this video is only fiction books. I did actually read quite a bit of non-fiction in 2020, so this is only a top 20 fiction list. All of that preamble out the way, I have separated it into categories, more or less. Starting with the one children's book that I have here, and that's A Sprinkle of Sorcery by Michelle Harrison, which is a children's fantasy. It's technically a sequel to A Pinch of Magic, which I haven't read, but it clearly didn't hinder my enjoyment of this second book. It's got pirates, magic, witches, ghosts. You know, it's a lot of elements that I really like, and that childhood whimsy, and it also had a really great relationships, which is something I really like in books as well, because you're following these 3 sisters as 2 of them have to go on an adventure essentially to save one of them, and I really enjoyed this. I'm gonna try not to linger on any of these books too long so that we're not here all day. Then I have a handful of YA. Majority of the books I have to talk about are adult. There are a few YA here. So one of those being The Dark Tide by Alicia Jasinka, which did this book get to this list purely because of that one really picturesque scene that has never left my mind? Pretty much yes. Because I don't know whether I'd say this is like the most amazing book ever, but I did enjoy my time reading it. That one scene has made me just think about this book a lot since, because it was just so pretty in my mind. But I do really like witchy stuff and sapphic sacrifice. Yeah, I feel like if I give full synopses for each of these books, it'll take too long, but there's some key words. Alright, another YA, a horror this time, and that is Sawkill Girls by, I think, Claire Legrand. I didn't write down any author names, so if I forget any, you've been warned. And this is a horror set on an island where girls keep going missing, and I really enjoyed this. This also has some sapphic stuff going on. It also has asexual representation, and I just really enjoyed it. I really like that spooky stuff. You're gonna see that there's a lot of horror on here, or even some of the fantasy that's on here has horror themes. But yeah, if you're new here, hi, I read across like all genres, but primarily fantasy and horror, so no one should be surprised. And this was also one that had some really great friendships explored, because family relationships or friendships are things I like. Then I have Dread Nation. This is Justine Island, I think's the author. This is historical, but with zombies, and it particularly explores kind of treatment of Black people around Civil War times in America, and zombies, because again, got to have those horror elements. One thing I will say is that I have, since reading it, I have seen discussion about the Indigenous representation not being great, so that's perhaps something to be aware of, but it is something I really enjoyed. I also read the sequel in 2020, and this had a bisexual main character, had more ace rep, and I really enjoyed the characters in this. Again, character relationships, but also just they were very strong characters in their own right. So a lot of interesting stuff was going on in that book. Then one I read in December was Harrow Lake. This is another horror, and this time in a small town where weird stuff is going on. And you're following this girl who had to go stay in a small town with her grandmother she's never met because something happened with her father. And it's interesting because there's this kind of spooky stuff going on of like, is there something supernatural and weird going on in this town, and all of kind of the stories they have as small towns sometimes do. But it's also quite an exploration. It also is quite an exploration of the mind and the way your mind can affect things and stuff that goes on there. So I found it a really interesting book. Didn't love the ending, but that's a common thing with me where endings I rarely am in love with, but I did really enjoy the ride. And then the last YA I have to talk about is Ghostwood Song by Erica Waters, which is another one with a bisexual main character. Not sorry. But this one has like gothic vibes, but like southern gothic vibes, because you're in this small town area, and there's also music is a huge part of this book, which is something I really enjoyed, particularly like folk music, and you got ghosts, because again we gotta have that horror, and you've got a bit of a murder mystery, and again lots of different dynamics between characters, and there was kind of a love triangle in this one, but it didn't bother me the way a lot of love triangles often do. And yeah, it's funny just because when I read this I'd never heard of it before, and then a few months later suddenly I saw a few people talking about it quite a bit. Now moving on to the more adult picks. First of all, I have a collection of books that didn't really share their main genre with any other books. So my favorite romance of 2020 was The Worst Best Man, which follows this woman and the brother of her ex-fiance. So there's some tension there as they are forced into a situation where they have to work together, and obviously romance blooms. I really enjoyed the family in this, again, common theme there, and also just the dynamics between these two characters. They had a lot of great banter, but really the thing about this book was I read it at just like the perfect time for me, because it was during lockdown when, you know, some days I just didn't have the energy and motivation to do anything. So there were a few days there that I just laid on the couch and listened to an audiobook, and this was one of the things I listened to, and because it was just one of those fun romances, it was just like the perfect thing to listen to while I was in that state. So I also loved it a lot for that. Then I have a historical, which also has contemporary elements, and that is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. And this is actually my biggest surprise of the year, because this is something that I wasn't really expecting to enjoy that much. Like, I'd been really hesitant to read it, and the only reason I did is because I was looking for a new audiobook and it was on Scribd, and so I was like, okay, I guess I'll give it a try. And then I was like hooked and couldn't stop listening to it. So this is following Evelyn Hugo's life, her being like a famous movie star, and her now being quite old and telling her story to someone for the first time. And there's lots of different things going on, and it was really interesting, and again, bisexual rep. And then I have one sci-fi to talk about, which is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This is one of those books that just made my brain, because I have a degree in philosophy. I have nerdy friends who like to have deep conversations about things. So I'm the type of person who will just think way too much about things rather than just like glossing over them. And the whole concept of this was to do with like alternate worlds and stuff. So it's just, there was a lot to unpack there, and I don't want to say much about it because I feel like these type of books are, part of the fun of it is just kind of finding out yourself what's going on. But yeah, lots to think about, lots to theorize about, and it was just a fun ride. Yeah. Then I have two comic books to talk about. So I have Monstrous, because I reread volume 1 and then read volume 2. I really enjoy these, even though I know some people don't and people find them confusing and stuff, but that doesn't bother me. The art is like some of the most stunning art I've seen in a graphic novel series, and weird horror vibes, and also Kippa's like the most precious thing ever. But yeah, we like weird horror stuff here, so. And then the other comic book that my favorite comic book really of the year that I just instantly fell in love with from the first couple of pages was the first volume of Rat Queens, which is a fantasy, which is reminiscent to something like Dungeons and Dragons, just in the way that it has your collection of different cast characters, and there's a lot of humor and banter and all of that kind of stuff, and I loved it so much. And you've got these strong female characters, and they're all very diverse and interesting in their own right, and I just loved it. And again, the art was stunning. And then we get into my 2 most read genres of the year, which should be a surprise to no one. So starting with fantasy, I have Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, which also is very strong on the horror vibe, so it's one of those ones that, you know, travels between the 2 genres. Now this is something that was a slow start for me. I kind of didn't care what was going on the first like 100 pages or so, but once I was hooked on this book, I was really hooked and couldn't stop reading, and so I loved it by the end. This is dark academia, ghosts, some stuff that you should definitely look at warnings for if you need trigger warnings, because there's a lot of stuff in here. There's stuff in here. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I like the weird horror stuff. I'm so bad at explaining things I like, so this is a great video to do. But yeah, I did really enjoy this, and I don't know how long we have to wait until the next one, because it is a series, and that's frustrating. But yeah, magic, ghosts, dark horror stuff. Yeah. Then I had The Last Wish, which is the first book chronologically for the Witcher series. This is a collection of short stories. One of the few books I gave 5 stars this year, which admittedly is probably also because I already had a connection to The Witcher, having played some of the games and watched the TV show and loved those. But the other thing I really loved about this was how deeply entwined the fairy tale influences were, and that became really clear in these short stories, and so I was in love with that. I love fairy tale retellings and just seeing how different people use them, and so I loved that element of it so much. And yeah, I like The Witcher. So then the last 2 fantasy I have are technically like whole series. The first one of those being the Hidden Legacy series by Ilona Andrews, because I reread the first 3 books, which are some of my favorite comfort reads. So I read those again during lockdown times where I just needed the warm fuzzy feelings. And then I moved on to reading the novella and also the 4th book in the series, which is the first book of a new arc, which I'm not loving as much, but I still, like, I love this series, and I love the family in these series. I love them all and their dynamics, and it's beautiful. And this is an urban fantasy series where people have like magical powers, and those magical powers really play into the power dynamics of the world, and there's often like mystery elements in these books because the family has like a private investigation firm, and yeah, I love them. And they also have they always have a romance element to them too, so something to know. Yeah, I love this series. And then the series that was actually completely new to me that I have fallen in love with, and I binge listened to about like the first 5 over like 3 days, maybe 2 or 3 days, and that's the Wayward Children series by Shauna Maguire, which is a fantasy series following children who like go through doors to magical worlds, etc., and then when they come back here and they're stuck here and kind of the consequences of that. But then also every second book is like in one of these worlds and following those children through that story. And I love these. One of the things I loved about this is that listening to these reminded me very much of being a child and having books read to me. There was something about them in the way they're told that really, it really had that magical feeling in that way. And I also just find them really interesting, and you have a diverse range of characters, a bunch of different representation. My favorite book is probably Down Among the Sticks and Bones, which is the second book, because again, those horror vibes. And because yeah, that one was set in like this dark horror, gothic horror type world. Yeah, so I really enjoyed listening to those. I know that the new one just came out and I'm gonna need to re-get Scribd so that I can continue that. Alright, and then my last genre I have then is, of course, horror. So, first I have The Luminous Dead by Caitlin Starling, which is a sci-fi horror where a woman is on this planet where they do like deep dives into these cave systems to get different things, and she's down there and they can be up down there for like months at a time, and they have to go in these suits and be all hooked up because they can't let their skin be kind of breathed out into the air, because there's also like these creatures that can sense you that will like move things and destroy you. And this is probably the book that scared me the most, because I don't get scared that often outside of video games. I'm a baby when it comes to video games and they terrify me. But in terms of reading books and watching movies, I rarely really get scared. But this book gave me the creeps. I was sitting in bed at night and it was giving me the creeps, and then I was like, now I have to freaking go to sleep after reading this. Yeah, something just being stuck down in that dark cave system, completely isolated too. Again, this was an interesting one to read while I was isolated at home, because it's down there alone with no connection to the outside world other than a woman in her speaker. There's also like a sapphic element to this, which is something I appreciated, that she was a sapphic character, that it wasn't like a thing in the story, she just kind of was, and that was really nice to see, with how much of our media is about kind of the struggles of people. But yeah, truly gave me the creeps. Confinement, isolation, what the hell is going on down here? Again, is there a supernatural element? Mind messery, and yeah, really enjoyed it. Then Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. Now this is one where I don't necessarily think it's like one of the best books, but it is one of the books that I genuinely just had the most fun with in 2020, because I read this in pretty much one sitting. I read it in one morning because I just didn't want to put it down because I was having so much fun with it, because it's a ghost story in a haunted furniture store. It was just fun. It was just fun. As much as there was dark horror stuff going on, it was just a fun reading experience for me, especially because it also had like diagrams of like furniture pieces that kind of just got weirder and weirder as the book went on. So just a fun reading experience. The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. This is one, again, that I've seen also categorized as fantasy, but this is a dark tale with a historical feel to it, because you've got this commune, you've got this like, you know, village of people essentially that are run by a very heavy religious presence, and the prophet is at the top of that, and there's a lot of sexism and just awful things happening to women. And then you also have witches in the forest, and there's kind of a conflict there, and you've also got our main character who is kind of unraveling her own personal family history and her connection to these things, and it explores a lot of it's one of those horror books which is great in the way that it really explores real world issues in terms of like leaving religion unchecked and treatment of women and all those kind of things, which again, there's some things to, it's another one of those books you should maybe have warnings for just because of some of the things in it. But yeah, I thought this was really well done, really interesting exploration of things while also having all those dark horror things going on, and witches. I really like witchy stuff, which is so. Then The Girl in Red, Christina Henry. That's the author. Girl in Red by Christina Henry, which is a Little Red Riding Hood retelling. Again, this is why we have a couple of common themes popping up here. We've already had some fairy tale retellings, which I like. But this has like a almost apocalyptic setting, pre-apocalyptic. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, but the world's gone to hell. You know, people have you know, are now in their true state of horrible when everyone's out for themselves. and there's some weird stuff going on, which the one frustrating thing about this book was there was some stuff going on that wasn't explained by the end, and I was like, I wanted to know more about that. But again, it was like weird horror stuff, fairy tale retelling, representation of both disability and was she bi, or I don't remember what her sexuality was. I remember she definitely spoke of having a relationship with a woman. I don't know. Regardless, I really enjoyed this and all the dark, weird stuff going on, and there was also some very sad moments, but also kind of uplifting to an extent by the end, and yeah, enjoyed it. And then the last book that I have to talk about today is one that anyone who's been around my channel at all should not be surprised by, and that is Bunny by Mona Awad. One of the weirdest books I've ever read. This is, again, some of those like dark academia vibes, I guess, because you're following this woman who's at like a writing college, and there's a group of women there that she doesn't like, and things are kind of weird. They all call each other Bunny, but then one night they invite her over to their smut salon, is that what it's called? And just things get weirder and weirder from there. You've got kind of almost cult vibes to an extent, but also kind of like witchcraft. It's almost, is it witchcraft? It's a kind of a dark witchcraft. Yeah, just weird stuff. It's also interesting though that I've seen a lot of people I've seen who've read this since I read it. I've seen a lot of people have very different interpretations of what actually happened in this book, and so that's really interesting to see as well, and I really want to reread it with some of those in mind, because I don't know, it has, the way it's written could probably come across as kind of pretentious, but I also loved the way it was written and the way it was kind of overwritten at points to that extent, and I just loved the weird dark vibes and just trying to work out what the hell was actually going on. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this book, okay? We like weird horror stuff. How many times have I said that? Alright, hopefully, I think that's it. I don't think I missed any. That should have been 20 books, right? Right. So, yeah, they are my top 20 books of 2020, my favorites that I read last year. Let me know what some of your favorites are. What was your favorite book that you read in 2020? I never know how to close out videos. I just kind of ramble. Anyway, yeah, stay safe, stay educated, and Starzy out.